Are you too busy, too stressed out, unhealthy? Then this is the place for you. Welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, where we help you create wellness and balance with a holistic approach that will work for you, even with the busiest of schedules, so you can live the life you want. And now, here's your host, Diane Randall.
Welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. I'm Diane Randall, your host. Thank you for listening, and if you're new to the show, welcome. It's so exciting to have you here listening. And if you like what you hear today, share this episode with someone you know. Balanced Living for Busy Professionals provides the best inner tools and strategies to help you break free of any habits, patterns, or attitudes that may be keeping you stuck in place. And it doesn't matter how busy your schedule is, you can create the life you want. Today, I have such an exciting guest in this episode to share with you. I'm talking to my guest about why it's important for leaders to listen and learn. And this is a very, very interesting topic for those of us that worked in an era where it's a whole different scenario. It's not that the leaders listen and learn. It's more about us paying attention to them and what they say. So this is a very, very interesting segment. My guest says that every time we influence others in any way, we are leading them good or bad. He says, think about who you are influencing and determine to be a positive force with those in your realm of contact. He says leaders are readers and readers are leaders. My guest says that the L in leadership stands for listen and learn. And if you stop doing those two things today, you will stop being a better leader tomorrow. So you want to stay tuned in until the very end of this episode. I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Hans Finzel, a successful author, speaker, and trusted authority in the field of leadership. For 20 years, he served as president of the international nonprofit World Venture, working in over 65 countries. Hans speaks, writes, and teaches on practical leadership principles from the real world, not just the classroom. His best-selling book is The Top 10 Mistakes Leaders Make. Hans has trained leaders on 5 continents, and his books have been translated into over 20 foreign languages. Today, he serves as president of HD Leaders and teaches and speaks globally on all things leadership. Hi, Hans.
Hello, Diane.
Boy.
Great to be on your show. Great to be on your show.
Oh, it's great to have you. Man, you've been busy in this leadership. Awesome. Yes. So are you ready to jump in and talk about how to learn and listen as a leader?
I am absolutely ready to dive in. Okay. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. The question I want to ask you is, talk about your own journey to leadership.
Yeah, well, a lot of people ask me the question, this is what I get the most. Are leaders born or are they made? You know that question, right?
Yep.
Of course. And my answer is yes. The answer is yes. They are born and they are made. And I actually think better leaders are the more effective ones that really learn to be a good leader than the people who just have natural leadership ability. So, I was born and I have natural leadership ability. When I was a little boy, in the neighborhood, I led all the kids. And when I was in high school, I had a band. I was the leader of the band.
Oh.
I was a Boy Scout. I was the head of the Boy Scout troop. So, some personalities just gravitate into leadership and people like to follow them just because of charisma or whatever. But that's really not the best part about leadership. I think the better part is about what you learn. And what happened to me is as I got going in my career, I started working for a terrible boss, and he was a miserable boss. And now I do a lot of speaking. By the way, we're talking about my new book, The Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader. And the first chapter is Listen and Learn. The L in leadership stands for listen and learn. And this person did neither one.
Oh, okay.
when I speak into a lot of audiences, I always ask people to raise their hand if you've worked for a miserable boss. Just guess how many people raise their hand.
Everyone. We all
Exactly.
have.
And then I start asking people, what made that boss so miserable and why did you hate working for that person? And so many times they'll say they didn't listen. They're just total control freaks. It was a one-way communication from them to us. They just didn't listen. And people hate that. And so I worked for a miserable boss who was very talented and very accomplished. And he was the head of our company because he was so smart. But he was a terrible leader. And I eventually quit because he was such a control freak and would never listen to our inputs. So we felt, like totally insignificant. And that's when I began to study leadership. And eventually I got my doctorate in the field and started writing on leadership because then I became a CEO of a big international nonprofit. And I just didn't want to be the kind of leader that made life miserable for people. I wanted to be the kind of leader that would actually empower followers. So that's kind of my journey into leadership.
Wow, that's awesome. And that's interesting that you learned that, because my experience and people that I talk to, it's still that bottom line driven leadership. And I guess until you recognize your own inner abilities, you don't stop to listen, and you don't think you have to learn anything. A lot of leaders feel that you just have to do, what I tell you to do. I give you your quotas or your whatever you need to do to get your work done, and that's what's important. So how do you help those type of leaders start to listen and learn?
Diane, it's amazing how many people ask me that question. Hans, my boss doesn't listen. How do I get them to start?
Yes.
I'm really sad when I see so many leaders that are like that. They think by virtue of the fact that I'm the boss, I'm the smartest and you need to listen to me because that's why I'm the boss, because I'm so smart, or, I have this position. And I was talking to a real estate agent today who he's in the real estate industry, and he was telling me that they had an office where there were 10 people that all resigned the same day because their boss was such a control freak that never listened. It's a painful thing that happens all the time. Okay, so you have a good question. How do you get a boss to start listening? And it could be a delicate thing because sadly, some leaders are not self-aware. In fact, the second chapter in my book is called the E in leadership stands for emotional intelligence. That's EQ. Are you familiar with EQ?
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
And I've learned that EQ is so much more important than IQ. And EQ is your ability to work with people, your people skills, your soft skills. And many leaders that are not effective and who frustrate their followers have terrible people skills. They have a very low IQ. They have a lot of blind spots. So you have to try to carefully spoon feed to these bosses some input that they might need to learn and grow and change, And I always say, try to find the person that the boss likes the most. And appoint that person to go talk to the boss and say, hey, we love you. You're great. We appreciate your leadership, appreciate the job. You got to be careful. You don't want to lose your job. But,
right.
but, would you be open to any input at all about your leadership that, so we could even be a better company? And, but all you can do is try to float some information or buy him a copy of my book and just sneak it onto his desk when he's not around, or her desk.
Yeah, that'd be an awesome Christmas present to the boss.
Yeah. Or I talked to somebody the other day who took their boss to a leadership conference, said, hey, I'm kind of interested in leadership. You want to go to this conference? And the boss, yeah, sure. And wow, it was fantastic because all of a sudden the boss began to understand they had some blind spots and some stuff they could learn.
Yeah, and I've also heard of companies that do now every year, the employees get to rate their bosses through some type of survey. I've been hearing about this lately.
Yes, It's very popular, the 360-degree evaluation.
Yeah, so I love that because at least now the boss has some checks and balances. You know, they have a leadership book and they have this 360, because I think this is new to the workplace to even think about listening to people that report to you, because the meetings are informal. When the leadership comes, it's special. You know, it's just you sit and listen while we talk, and at the end, we'll ask you a few questions. That's the format I've seen many, many times. So like I said earlier, it's hard to even get close to that person, to even get to know them.
Yeah, well, I tell you, Diane, and there's a revolution going on in our country about millennials coming into the workforce, you know, the young generation. And if we go on down the chapter titles of my book, The Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader, I use the acrostic of leadership, and I have a principle for each of the letters in the word leadership. And the A stands for accessibility. And millennials demand accessibility and vulnerability among their leaders. They're not going to respect and they're not going to follow one of these ivory-tower leaders that all they do is bark orders or come to a meeting and make pronouncements and then leave. You know, that's so old school. And if your company or wherever you work, if you want to attract millennials, you're going to have to practice accessibility and vulnerability, or they're just going to go somewhere else. They will not put up with that old school approach to leadership.
Can you talk about practical leadership tips that the listeners can just start to understand? If there's a leader out there who has not started to begin to listen and learn, what tips could you give them?
Start reading some books on leadership. That's probably the easiest thing. And listen to podcasts. I have a Leadership Answer Man podcast. I have 75 shows on my website, hansfinzel.com, and you can kind of go down and look for a topic that interests you. They're half-hour shows. You can listen to them while you're driving. So I'm a big fan of podcasts and books and, of course, YouTube videos. There's all kinds of the TED Talks on YouTube are fantastic. So expose yourself to new information about leadership. That would be probably my first suggestion.
And can you talk about the 7 things people feel when they're not listened to?
Yes. They feel unimportant. By the way, there's a book called The 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. And I'll tell you, one of the 3 signs is I'm invisible. You know, nobody even knows I'm there. So number 1, unimportant. Number 2, marginalized. Number 3, it's a waste of time trying to talk to leadership or management. Number 4, I'm invisible. Number 5, my opinions are not respected. Therefore, number 6, I am not respected. And that hurts so much. And number 7, I have nothing to contribute. And Diane, I'm going to give you a bonus. Number 8.
Okay.
Number 8. How you feel when you're not listened to, nothing is going to change. And that person, guess what? They're going to go away. They're going to go somewhere else. And if they're trapped in a job, sadly, I talk to a lot of people who are trapped in jobs. They cannot go away. You know, they have a mortgage, they have their family, they have their children. They might be in a city where the economy is horrible. And it's so sad. If they can't leave, what do? They go into a shell. They're not productive. They're miserable employees, and they really don't make much of a contribution. They're what I call a placeholder. So let me turn it around and tell you, just to be positive, how do I feel if I am listened to? And let me explain what it means to be listened to. I had a time when one of my employees came into my office and, you know, they had a lot of courage. And I kind of learned to start fishing for feedback. And I would ask my people that reported to me, you know, actually during our annual review, not only would I review them, but I'd say, I want to give you a chance to review me as your leader. And one person said, you know, Hans, I don't think you listen well. And I said, well, explain that to me. And And of course, I'm a very strong personality. I'm a visionary. I've got all these big ideas, and I can run over people, because I'm a strong-willed type A personality. And I learned that I was coming across as a person that didn't listen, so I had to sharpen my listening skills. And I did learn to be a much better listener. However, sometimes people say you don't listen well because you don't do what they want you to do. And there's a difference. Sometimes a leader, a good leader will listen and then say, I really appreciate this feedback, this input you're giving to me about this decision, and I'm not going to go this way, and here's why, or we're not going to go this way. But I found people just want to be heard. They don't necessarily demand that you do it their way, but they just want to know, I've been heard. So here's the 8 things that happen if you are listened to. Number 1, I feel important. Number 2, I'm an essential part of the team. Number 3, I matter to management. Number 4, I'm visible. Number 5, my voice is respected. Number 6, I am respected. Number 7, I matter. I matter in this enterprise. And number 8, real change is coming because they're open to input. Pretty cool, huh?
That is very, very cool. I had a conversation the other day with someone, and we were talking, and this lady was sharing with me, she's in sales. She has a certain quota every month that she has to make in her business. And she was saying January, February, and March, she was telling her boss the industry that she works in, it's flat. And there's a lot of competition. So she's not meeting her numbers. And she was just sharing with how the boss isn't listening to me. He doesn't hear me. All he's saying to me every month is, you're not meeting your quota. You're not meeting your quota. So how would she possibly get him to hear her when he's most likely, and I don't know this to be true, driven by the bottom line numbers?
And unfortunately, there are a lot of bosses. I mean, in some industries, that's just the way it is. And I know in the multi-level marketing industry, in some companies, it's that way. It's all about meeting your quotas and meeting your sales. Sadly, in a situation like that, the people are viewed as production units, not real people. And, I don't know how to change a boss like that.
Okay.
Because they're probably also driven by somebody above them. So I think it's hard to change a person like that. And you may just have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I said, wow, I couldn't wait to bring up that scenario and see if you had any insight into that I could share with her.
Well, it's hard to change hard-headed bosses. So my message to any of you that are listening, if you're in any kind of leadership position or management, just decide you're going to be different. You're going to be the kind of person that actually empowers your people instead of frustrates them. And you're going to listen to them. I'm a big fan of servant leadership. And servant leadership means, here's my definition of servant leadership. When the leader cares more about the good of the team than his or her own enrichment or his or her own goals. So let me say that again. A servant leader cares more about the good of the team than his or her own enrichment. And people know if you care about them or if you're just only out to enrich yourself. People don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. And I think it was Zig Ziglar years ago who said, if you'll help people get what they want, you'll get what you want. So to me, I'm a huge fan of servant leadership where you make a conversion from, it's not just about me, it's about we. We together are going to build a great team. And we're all going to be fulfilled and we're all going to be successful. So if you're listening and you have a miserable boss, just think to yourself, if I ever become a boss or I am a boss, I'm going to be different. I'm not going to be one of those bullheaded management types.
That is so awesome because I feel things are changing just based on this conversation. And I've heard the servant leadership concept thrown around. I've been hearing people talk about it. And I was so excited about that because I've been in consulting for many years. So I'm not really, even though I go in and out of companies, I'm not really in the corporate culture. So I don't really necessarily pay attention, to all the things that the upper leaders are doing for the most part, unless it relates to what I'm there to do in the company. So it's very exciting. It sounds like you are really helping to just help leaders become more human, become more effective listeners and learners.
That's my passion. Absolutely. Because there's more bad leaders than good leaders. And my passion is to help turn that around and help people in leadership and management, really do a better job. That's my passion.
You say great leaders listen and they are lifelong learners. Talk about that a bit.
I've been to college and I've got a graduate degree. In fact, I have a postgraduate degree. And so, I could think to myself, I know everything there is to know. I'm smart. I've been well educated. But the fact is, a year after you graduate from whatever college you're going to go to, most of what you learned is irrelevant because we live in such a fast changing world. And I guarantee what I learned in college and grad school, it was some helpful stuff, but we never arrive. That's my point. We have to be lifelong learners. Just because we have a degree, some people take that as I've arrived. I'm qualified. I know everything there is to know. And now I'm just going to push forward and, I don't need to be open to change or to learn more stuff. So effective leaders today are lifelong learners. They read books. Like I said, leaders are readers and readers are leaders. And if you stop learning today, you're going to stop leading tomorrow. People don't like to follow bosses and leaders that aren't learning themselves and changing because nobody's perfect, right?
Nobody's perfect. And today, it's so apparent when you see that person. When you see that leader, they stick out like a sore thumb. At least that's my experience.
Yes. And, I had the weirdest experience. I would have a lot of CEO updates with my team. I had my small team that reported to me, but would have company-wide updates. And sometimes I would reveal to my team and my company something where I had failed. And through the failure, I learned something that I didn't know. And they loved it. I was always surprised how much people loved it when I got vulnerable and admitted that I wasn't perfect. And I learned a valuable lesson there. And that's again about vulnerability is a powerful thing. If you pretend you're perfect, everybody knows you're not. And it's a powerful thing when you can be vulnerable and tell your people, you know what? I blew it, or I made a mistake. Man, I was totally wrong on this thing, and I'm glad I got corrected. People learn to respect. They will trust you more and more if you're vulnerable. People don't trust people that pretend to be perfect because they know they're not.
Right. When you were talking, I started thinking about what about evaluation? What does this new thinking do to the way people are evaluated in the workplace? Because in some organizations, failure is a bad thing. If you make mistakes, you're written up for it. You hear about it a year later, 6 months later, about all the things you messed up on.
That's a sad corporate culture that doesn't allow for mistakes. I heard a story years ago about an IBM executive who walked in and made $1 million mistake. And he walked into the boss and he said, he was ready to be fired. And he sat down by the boss's desk and said, okay, I guess I'm done. And he said, are you kidding? I just invested $1 million in your training. I'm not going to let you go now.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
I love that. See, that's a wise, mature view of developing people, that you allow them, give them freedom to make mistakes and learn. And that's how we learn and that's how we grow. And a healthy company will allow, especially new people, to make mistakes. That's risk taking. And if you are a risk-adverse corporate culture, you're not going to grow. You're not going to thrive in the future. The companies that are thriving, they take risks, and risk by its very nature means we're going to have some failures. We're not always going to succeed with our experiments.
So it sounds like the evaluation of the employees become more of a supportive document. How can I help this person grow? How can I help this person learn?
The best evaluations are developmental. Now, I always practice positive and negative. Every review should have good news and bad news, and it should not just tell them what they did wrong. I always practice, here's what you did great, here's what I commend you for, and here's areas that you need to grow.
Okay.
And then here's a developmental plan for the coming year. That's an awesome review. If it's just negative, you're just discouraging people. You're not helping at all without a developmental plan to help them grow. And again, if you're really committed to people and to their success, I remember I had a CFO, and he had some blind spots in his training. We paid for him to get his MBA so he'd be a better CFO. Okay.
Wow.
That's being committed to the people as they develop. So it's got to be a developmental approach to evaluations, in my opinion.
Wow. So what does it mean to work out your leadership gift?
Well, if you have the gift of leadership, and I'm using that in a very broad sense, work it out in the sense of keep working at making it better. That's what I mean. It's like if you were a violinist, I would say keep working out your skills as a violinist or a pianist or an artist or whatever. It's the same for leaders. I say, hey, if you have the responsibility, keep working at it. You may think it's a gift, or you may not think it's a gift. It's just something that happened to you. But regardless, that's what I mean. Work it out, just like you would being a piano player or being an artist, whatever.
Well, Hans, you've certainly given us a lot of information on how leaders can just get better at listening and learning. And I want to thank you for being here on Balanced Living for Busy Professionals today, sharing this great information with us.
Thank you, Diane. It's a joy, and I'm excited about my new book, Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader. I hope your listeners will pick it up, and you can find me on hansfinzel.com. If you can figure out how to spell my name, you can find me on my website where all my leadership stuff is parked, okay?
And today's episode has been based on the L in one of the 10 characteristics from the book, Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader. And all of Hans' information will be in the show notes of this episode. So if you want to check out his leadership books, his podcasts and tips, visit his website, hansfinzel.com, which will give you a jump start to becoming a better leader. Thank you, Hans, for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Diane. Thanks for having me.
Let us know what you think about this episode of Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. I want to hear from you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. This podcast is sponsored by DianeRandallConsults.com. If you like this show, the best way to support it is by leaving 5-star feedback on iTunes. And please feel free to email your questions, comments, and suggestions to feedback@DianeRandallConsults.com. Until next week, namaste.